There is no doubt we live in a world of prejudice. Our very survival may depend on split-second judgments. The acute stress response, also known as the fight or flight response, is a physiological reaction that occurs when faced with a perceived harmful event, attack, or threat to survival. Even in non-life-threatening situations, we make decisions based on our own accumulated database of life experiences. Oftentimes, these decisions might be considered irrational, unfounded, discriminatory, unfair, or even racist. They are nevertheless real. We make judgments about other people, their motivations and abilities, intentions, character, values, or competence before knowing the truth about them. Are these prejudices ever justified? Or worse, do we imagine others have prejudices against us when they really don't? Beginning in the 1950s, in a response to an overwhelming male presence among elite musicians at the top symphony orchestras in the United States, selection committees began adopting blind auditions, whereby the identity and sex of potential candidates was concealed from the jury by a screen. According to a study from the year 2000, Orchestrating Impartiality, the impact of blind auditions on female musicians, the use of screens during auditions increased the probability that a woman would advance from preliminary rounds by 50%. The audition process was refined throughout its implementation as several leaks were discovered. Even behind curtains, some female candidates inadvertently gave away their sex by their gait and the sound of heels as they approached the judges behind the curtain. Measures to mitigate these problems were continually put in place. Carpeting was installed, candidates were identified by number, and communications were transmitted by an intermediary, all with the intention of preserving absolute anonymity in order to guarantee a fair audition. These measures further helped women reach the final rounds, where their likelihood of selection increased by another 30%. The dataset also included detailed records from 8 major symphony orchestras, covering auditions from the late 1950s to 1995. By comparing outcomes across multiple auditions and over time, the study could assess the effect of blind auditions on both male and female candidates, taking into account variations in the size of the applicant pools. Moreover, the study found that the transition to blind auditions accounted for a significant portion of the increase in the proportion of female musicians in orchestras, suggesting that the effect was not merely due to a larger number of male applicants. Specifically, the study concluded that blind auditions explained 30% of the increase in the proportion of women among new hires, and possibly 25% of the overall increase in the percentage of female musicians in the orchestra.
Many people say to me, oh, it allowed women to enter the orchestra. But let's for a moment not care about that. Let's just care about the quality of what we're producing. The reason the blind audition is so great is not because it let women in, but because it let better musicians in, whatever their gender.
In spite of all these measures, about 69% of musicians in the major symphony orchestras in the United States still are men. Have we reached the upper limit of elite female musician representation in the top orchestras? Or is the difference still a consequence of prejudice? In other words, after all this, are the top musicians still men after all? The blind auditions made it perfectly clear that prejudice indeed existed. But what does it say about its absence? The very livelihood of many competent people rests in the decisions of interviewers who have the difficult task of selecting the best person for a job, regardless of factors that lie outside the scope of competency required. These factors could be sex, race, height, accent, age, religion, marital status. One study attempted to measure the impact that a candidate's facial scars had on interviewers. The study, To Look or Not to Look, Acknowledging Facial Stigmas in the Interview to Reduce Discrimination, measured the degree of distraction that a candidate's facial scars had on the interviewer by using eye tracking technology. The conclusion in this experiment was that visual attention to the scars depended on whether an applicant acknowledged their stigma during the interview. In other words, if the candidate recognized verbally to the interviewer the presence of the scar, both the interviewer and the candidate could move on with the interview, minimizing the influence of the scar. This strategy seems to have had the opposite effect on the outcome compared to efforts to conceal potentially biasing factors. Now consider another experiment: perceptions of the impact of negatively valued physical characteristics on social interaction, nicknamed the Scar Experiment. In 1980, a team of researchers at Dartmouth College recruited 25 women for a social experiment. They told the volunteers that the study aimed to observe how people reacted to strangers with a facial scar. They were brought into a room with no mirrors. Professional makeup artists gave them realistic and gruesome scars using Hollywood makeup techniques designed to be noticeable during conversations. They were shown the scar in a handheld mirror and then told that finishing powder would be applied to prevent smearing. However, the researchers secretly removed the scar without the participants' knowledge. The volunteers believed they still had the scar. The participants then were sent to another room and asked to notice how strangers responded to their appearance. They were told not to mention their scars to anyone. They engaged in conversations and were told to rate the interviewer's behavior, such as eye contact and friendliness. When the volunteers returned, they all reported that strangers were ruder and stared at their scars. In reality, their faces were unchanged. They perceived hostility and discrimination in their conversation partner, which they attributed to the non-existent facial scar. The subjects had been primed to recognize prejudice even when there wasn't any. Many of the subjects even gave very specific testimonials that in their minds proved there was prejudice. The victim mindset distorts our perception of reality and further hinders our opportunities. The victim mindset may stem from almost primitive human motivations, but can also leverage social and cultural gains. Being perceived as a victim can attract attention and sympathy from others, fulfilling emotional needs for care and validation. It can also validate feelings of hurt, anger, or injustice, providing a framework for understanding and expressing these emotions. Adopting a victim identity can serve as a way to avoid responsibility for one's actions or circumstances, shifting blame to external factors or other people. Paradoxically, presenting oneself as a victim can be a means of exerting influence over others. By invoking guilt or pity, individuals can manipulate situations to their advantage. Our current culture rewards victimhood, leading individuals to adopt this identity to gain social standing, benefits, or protection. Positioning oneself as a victim, a person can claim a moral high ground, suggesting that their suffering makes them more virtuous or deserving of respect and consideration. We have entered a Faustian bargain by trading our noble desire for justice for super simplistic solutions to inequality. Well-meaning efforts to eliminate potential biases by hiding factors such as race, sex, or appearance have awakened this primal state of mourning and self-pity in many, who presume that responsibility for their advancement rests solely in the hands of the new selection committees of society. This self-imposed victimhood has found support in many who fail to understand the true nature and nuances of the problem. and has stunted the progress of these individuals as they have reaped short-term rewards for themselves at the cost of long-term gains for the group.